All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again today. And I hope you all had a wonderful week the past week. And today we'll be learning about the few basic physical aspects of our camera, and we will also be learning about um, the lenses and a few stuff like that. So we shall begin by uh, reminding that we have a few new students here. Uh, there are few who are joining us for the first time, and I want to welcome you all to this meeting as well. And it may get a little complicated with few technical things here and there, but I'm hoping that by sticking through and paying careful attention, you'll be able to understand. And once you understand it, it's going to be very easy, whether you're going to do photography on a camera or on your phone, wherever it may be. All right, so I'm glad to have everyone here. And also a reminder that if you haven't joined our WhatsApp group yet, then feel free to join. And we also have a Google Classroom where you'll be submitting our assignments. And to watch the previous classes, those will be uploaded there as well. Or you could join the Facebook group and you can watch the previous classes there as well. All right. Photography, it's all about light. So when I take a picture, what's really happening is that I'm pointing my camera at something and then I'm letting the light enter my camera from there. And my camera, what it does is it'll, with a sensor, it'll detect what light is coming in. So it's all about light. You can experiment with shaping how you want the light to be on your subject. So, but everything depends around light. Nowadays, what we see is what we get. And for example, I have a camera on my phone. And if I were to cover the portion of my screen or above the phone, nothing would happen. But if I were to cover just the camera, entire thing would be blocked. Like just this lens, small area where the camera is, if I block it, you're not able to see anything. But that is not how it always was. Back when they first invented cameras, they didn't have this technology of having a display and having light sensors and everything. If you recall from last week's class, all they had was first they had the sheets, and then after they had the film roll. So they couldn't exactly see through that, and they didn't have a display, of course, back then. So they couldn't see like how we are able to see. So what options did they have? They came up with something called a twin lens flex or a rangefinder camera. What these cameras did was, one second, am I still being highlighted? Yeah, okay, thank you. So what these cameras did were they had two lenses in them. So the top or the first lens would be through which the photographer would look through. So, so that they can see what the camera is seeing. So by looking through, they would get a very close perspective of what the camera is actually seeing. By camera, I mean what picture is being taken. So when light entered through the second lens and hit the photographic film behind the lens, that's when it would take a picture. Of course, it needed two lenses. It was more expensive, more complicated, and they weren't exactly getting the same perspective between the two lenses. So that caused for some research and development, and they came up with a single lens reflex camera, or in short, SLR camera. What this did was the lens would be just one lens. The lens would let light in, and when the light entered the lens, it would bounce off a mirror over here. This mirror would reflect light into a prism. This thing over here that I'm highlighting with my mouse is a prism that bounced the light and it came out the viewfinder. The piece that we keep our eye against to see what the camera is seeing was called the viewfinder. So the light would come and they would be able to see what this lens is letting in, what light this lens is letting in. And I'm sure this would be difficult to take a picture, right? So that's when they came up with a mechanism within the camera. Uh, so when they press the shutter button, this mirror would actually flip up and the light would go straight through. And this is where the photographic film would be. And the light would fall on the film and a picture would be taken. And that was the mechanism behind the SLR. And this solved the problem of having to deal with two lenses. And they could also see exactly what picture they were going to get, same perspective. Our modern cameras nowadays operate on a similar principle. In fact, the DSLR as we know it, the professional cameras these days are all just a digital SLR camera. The previous generation was a single lens reflex SLR camera. And now we have a digital single lens reflex camera. And the main difference is that these cameras have a photo sensor instead of a roll of film inside. All right. This is what the inside of a modern DSLR somewhat looks like. As you can see in the top left corner, we can see that there's a picture that I showed previously of the light entering the lens, hitting the mirror, bouncing through the pentaprism, and coming out the top viewfinder. It's almost identical with how our digital cameras are present. We can see the light come through the lens and it bounces off this mirror. It bounces up into the pentaprism and we can see it through this viewfinder. Behind this mirror is what we have nowadays as a shutter and a sensor. This mirror is not completely it's not a complete mirror. It's partly translucent so that some light can still go through and it bounces off of another mirror here that helps with autofocus, but that we can talk about later. For now, I want all of you to pay attention on this mirror here and this light entering and bouncing off. This is the whole reason why the camera is called a DSLR. And this is how most modern cameras function. Here's a simplified version so that you can avoid the distracting elements. So light enters through the lens, it bounces off the main mirror, enters the pentaprism, and we see it through the eyepiece. And that is how, even though we are looking through the viewfinder, we're able to see exactly what we get. And that is why when I point my phone at something, or when I point, someone's unmuted. So that is why when I point my camera at something, I'm able to see what my camera is seeing. And that way I'm able to take the picture the way I want it without having to guess or make any calculated decisions that way. There's also a new genre of cameras called mirrorless cameras, which I will focus more on later. But what they essentially do is they get rid of the mirror. That's what they call the mirrorless. And by doing so, they're able to make the cameras smaller. And how do we see through the viewfinder, you may ask? That's because they have a more advanced or complicated system where the light hits the sensor directly. And then the sensor sends a signal directly to where the viewfinder is. And we have a small screen over there. So we're able to see. But I'll explain more in detail. For now, what's important to know is about the DSLR and that there's also something called the mirrorless. This is going to be a short video, very short video of the mirror in a DSLR. I'll be playing this now. As you can see, there's a mirror over here that reflects light. When the picture is taken, the mirror flipped up. The mirror flips up and the shutter comes down and that exposes the sensor to the light that is entering the camera. When the camera decides, okay, that's it, the picture is taken, the shutter comes and covers it over again so that there's no more light entering into the sensor and the mirror comes down again. I want you to watch this once again. This is a slow motion. These things happen at such a high speed that we may not be able to see this with the naked human eye. And As you can see, the mirror flips up and down, and that is how it's able to take a picture. And this is the working of a DSLR, essentially. All right, with that part out of the way now, let's move on to the physical aspects of the camera. All right, we had some little complicated part so far with the mirrors and everything. Let's learn about how a camera is on the outside. Here is a camera. It's a average camera. I wouldn't say it's the most professional, but the reason I picked this camera is because, well, most of the things that you learn here can be applied to all ranges of cameras, including professional cameras. There may be a few extra buttons, few extra controls that you can manipulate for getting the picture you want it the way you want it. But if you learn the principle behind these, then it's going to be similar with whichever camera you may use, whichever brand of camera you may use. This right here is a Canon. You may have a Sony, or you may have a Nikon or a Fujifilm, whichever brand camera you may be using. They generally have common aspects. So we'll be studying those physical aspects today. Just a general overview so that everyone is on the same page about how a camera is. To the side, we have usually the side of the camera has ports where you can connect external things. This camera has a port for you to attach an external shutter so that you can click pictures without touching the camera or from a distance. It also has a USB and a HDMI to connect to another display. The back of the camera has typically a display through which we can see pictures and adjust settings. Above the display, we have a small portion through which we keep our eye against and we see what the camera is seeing. That's the viewfinder. So by looking through that, we're able to see what the camera sees. And then besides the viewfinder, to the side of the display as well, we find a couple buttons here and there. And this is where most cameras would differ. It's not exactly the same buttons everywhere, but the functions are pretty much similar. And we will study that later as well. But just so that you know, there's mainly a display, the viewfinder, and controls for controlling the camera. The top of the camera usually has dials and buttons as well. You can see that the front over here, there's a shutter button. That's the button we click to take pictures. And besides that, there's usually also a dial for selecting what picture mode you may be in. I think at this point it's good that everyone who has a camera by them, by their hands, if you can take and observe your camera, you may see that there's a dial on top to choose what mode you want to apply so that the camera can help you with taking pictures. You also have an on-off switch. Sometimes these dials may be on the right side or the left side of the viewfinder. It may differ from camera to camera. So the position is not necessary. Just the most important thing would be to learn what each of these modes mean. And we will study that again in a later class. For now, we're just going through a rough overview so we can know what the camera looks like on the outside. Coming to the other side, we can see that on this camera, there's not much you can do there, but some cameras may have a slot there for inserting your memory card. The memory card is what you store your pictures on. So when the camera takes a picture, it's transferred to the memory card, and you can connect that memory card to your phone or your computer, and you can transfer photos that way. Currently in this video, they did not show the bottom of the camera, but in some cameras, the bottom is where you insert a battery, or some cameras may have the memory cards at the bottom as well. And that's where you attach your tripod or your camera stand. So as a rough overview, I will be going through each of these small points very quickly, very briefly, in a very simple layman's terms, so that everyone will have a rough idea of the camera's physical aspects. Starting from the top, you can see that this is labeled as built-in flash. Most cameras, lower end and mid-range cameras, have a flash built into them. And when you choose to take a picture with flash, the top of the camera, it flips up a little, and there's a flash there that helps you take picture. Right behind that, we have a flash sync contacts and the hot shoe. This hot shoe is what most people connect their external flashes to. You may have seen, just a minute. Cutting again, it's okay. Right. So you may have seen all these large and fancy camera flashes at the top of cameras that many people use when they go for photo shoots. These connect to the camera through these hot shoes that are found on the top of the camera. These hot shoes at the top of the camera is what fits this flash. And these flashes have small contacts at the bottom. You can see these pins over there, and that is how they communicate with the camera, and that's how the camera tells the flash of when to take the picture. Moving on, we have here it says the EF mount index. You can see that it's pointing towards a red dot over here. Now, when you see a camera, obviously you have two parts, a camera body and a lens. How do you connect these two differs from company to company. I'm using a Canon camera. So the Canon camera has a separate mount compared to what a Sony camera would use or what a Nikon camera would use. So the lenses that I mount here to this camera have to be compatible with this mount that is on the camera. So this lens that I have here is compatible with this camera, and it will be compatible with other cameras that have the same mount. But if I have a friend who uses a different company camera, let's say he uses a Sony camera, this lens would not mount on his camera and he would not be able to use this without using an adapter. So this mount is different from company to company. And for Canon, it is called the EF mount, or they also have other mounts within the company called the EFS. And recently they've come with an RF. We can study the mounts later, but that is in simplicity what this mount is. It is so that you can attach the lens to the camera, and it differs from company to company. And also you will notice a small red dot. I'm hoping you're able to notice a small red dot over here and a small white box over here. If you're not able to see, I hope you can see it on camera here.
Yes, we can see.
Are you able to see? Okay, good. When you have a lens from a compatible mount, you will also see a small white box over here. That is so that I can line up the correct place and mount it without damaging the lens or the pins. So when I line up this white box on the mount and the white box on the lens, it fits in perfectly, and I can just twist it and it's mounted. It stays on. All right, so that's about the mount. The strap mount is obviously where we mount the camera strap to. And to the side, we have a button for the flash. Not all cameras have it in the same place, but these cameras have. And when you press the button, the flash pops up and you can see the camera's inbuilt flash there. The terminal cover to the side is what covers the ports. All cameras have different ports. It's not like there's a standard set of ports that a camera should have. But in general, you would find a port for the mic, and you'll find an HDMI port or an AV digital, which is audio visual digital. And as you can see, mine has two ports here. One is for the mic, one is for an external button for taking pictures. And then the other two here are for for video to come out to if I'm connecting to a camera or an external device. Moving to the bottom, we have a lens release button. This button here is what we press in order to get the lens to come off. So when you want to switch lenses or we want to store the camera in a different place and you don't want to have it occupy this much size, we can take the lens off. And that's the button that you press in order to get the lens to release. The depth of field preview, I'll focus on later once I explain more of the camera settings inside. The lens lock pin is part of the mount over here. These pins help secure the lens in place. That's pretty much it. I've already explained what the lens mount is. It's this metal ring here that you attach your lenses to. You can see there are small contacts here within your lens mount. This is how your camera communicates with your lenses. Your lenses would have this gold plated parts here that attach and touch there, so that the camera can communicate with the lens. I showed you the mirror earlier, the mirror inside the camera, and that mirror is what makes my camera a DSLR. If you have a mirrorless camera, then that mirror would probably not be there. The place that I hold is called the grip, and above that we have a shutter button that we click to take pictures. And besides that, I have a small wheel over here that I can scroll in order to change a couple settings. Settings wise, it may differ from camera to camera, so I'm not going to go into specific again until we learn more in detail about that. All right, enough of all this boring stuff. Physical aspects, I already explained. The sides will have the ports usually. The other side is where you would mount the storage card, the SD card. You can usually flip it open and you can pop in your cards to the side. The backs are where we have a display for the camera. Depending on which camera you have, you may have a flip out camera screen that can turn in any angle, or it can go up or down, or some cameras just have it so that you cannot move it. And once you have the display facing there, you can see the settings there. It differs again, but I want you to notice something. All the cameras here have something in common. They have the displays, the viewfinder, and a couple of buttons to control to the side. The buttons may not be exactly the same, even though you're looking at cameras from the same company here and cameras from the same company here. But once you know how to use the buttons from one camera and how to control the functions, you should not have trouble using the other camera once you get used to it. The top of the camera, like I mentioned, has this mode dial to control what mode you're in taking pictures. And it has the hot shoe and a couple other fancy buttons to control fancy settings that we will study later. The bottom, like I mentioned, is where the battery is kept. The battery usually, again, differs from model to model. So one battery from my camera may be compatible with another, but not with every other camera. The batteries are usually specific based on what models they are for.